Morning, everyone. So, what we usually do here on Thursday night is meditation. We start with uh, a basic meditation practice using the breath to focus our mind, develop greater awareness, mindfulness, concentration, or at least try to. That's hard to do, but we try. So, we do that for about 20, 25 minutes. And then I introduce some other meditation topics. So we do a different one each week based on the book that I wrote, How to Meditate, which contains lots of different meditations from the Tibetan tradition. So the topic we'll look at tonight is working with fear, how to deal with fear, which is a problem many people have in the West. Many people have all over the world, so it's pretty universal. So we'll look at what is fear and how we can work with fear, and then do a meditation on how we can do that. Okay, so to start with, it's important when meditating to be as comfortable as possible. And there's different ways of sitting, cross-legged on the floor or in a chair. So each person needs to find whatever works best, whatever's most comfortable for them. But whatever way you do sit, it is important to try to keep your back straight, sit with a straight back. And although the back ideally should be straight, and I say ideally because some people may have back problems, and that might make it difficult for them to have a completely straight back. So depending on your own body or situation, just try your best to sit straight. But at the same time, let your shoulders be relaxed and try to have all the parts of your body as relaxed as possible. So in fact, what we usually do to begin with is do what's called a body scan, going through the body. There's different ways you can do it. One is from the top down, others from bottom up. So I like to go top down. So that's how I'll lead it. So I just go through a quick version of a body scan, going through the body to notice if there's any areas of tightness or tension in the body. And if there are, to release, let go of the tension. And one way you can do that is imagine that it melts as if the tension is solid like a piece of ice. And just imagine it melting, just like when you put ice in the sun, it melts and then just flows away. So that's one way you can let go of tension. Imagine that it melts and flows out of you, kind of drains out of your body, and it just sinks into the ground beneath us. Or you could just imagine it dissolving, disappearing like a bubble. When a bubble pops, it just disappears in space. So whatever way works for you, you can find your own way. But the point is to try to let go of tension as much as possible. Now, you might not be able to let go of all tension. There might be some stubborn parts or places of tension in your body. So don't worry about that. Just do the best you can to try to let go of tension. And if there's any remaining tension, just accept it. Just accept that you've done the best you can and that bit of tension won't go away. So don't try to push it and get upset about it. So just leave it and be content with it. Okay, so start by feeling the top of your head. Let go of any tension there may be there. Next, feel your forehead. And let your forehead relax. Be free of tension, be free of worry lines, worry wrinkles we sometimes have in our forehead. Let it be smooth, relaxed. Relax your eyes, all the muscles around your eyes and behind your eyes. Relax the rest of your face. There's actually many muscles in our face that we use when we talk and make facial expressions. So now let all those muscles relax. So you can leave your face expressionless, or if you wish, you can leave a bit of a smile on your lips. Smiling can help our mind to be more relaxed. So feel free to smile if you wish. Now relax the right side of your head. And then the back of the head. And then the left side of the head. And then go inside of your head. See if you can notice any sensations inside the head. And if there's any tension, see if you can let it go. Let it melt and flow away. So try to have the whole of your head, the outside as well as the inside, as relaxed and free of tension as possible. And then move your awareness into your neck. Relax your neck and also your throat. And then the upper part of the back, the shoulder blades and shoulder muscles. So there's sometimes tension that collects there. If there is, see if you can let it go. Let it melt, flow away, sink into the earth. And then let the awareness continue moving down through your back and relax the middle part of your back. And then the lower part of the back. Go all the way down to your seat. And then from there, shift your awareness to the front part of your body, starting with your chest. Relax the outside of your chest, but also the inside. We have our lungs and heart. This is an area where we sometimes have tension, perhaps because of emotional problems. So if there's any tension, see if you can let it go, let it melt and flow away. And Let the awareness continue moving down through your torso, the middle part of your body, and relax the area of the diaphragm and hold the internal organs there, stomach, liver, kidneys. And the same with the lower part of the abdomen, including all the organs in that area. That's again an area where we sometimes have tension because of emotional turmoil. So if there's any tension there, see if you can let it go. Let it melt and drain out of you and sink into the earth. It can also help that if when you breathe, you imagine breathing into that area and imagine the breath helping to bring a more relaxed feeling, a more relaxed energy. And breathe out whatever tension or tightness or emotional turmoil there may be. Just let it go out with your breath. And then relax the area around the pelvis and hips and all the organs in that area and muscles. And then let your awareness start to travel down through your right leg and relax first the upper part of the leg, the right thigh, all the muscles in that area. And then the right knee. And then the lower part of the right leg, the calf. And then the ankle. And foot. And toes. From there, from your right foot, shift your awareness to your left leg, starting with the upper part of the leg. Relax all the muscles in that area, in the thigh. And then the left knee. And then the lower part of the left leg. And then the ankle, the foot, the toes. So now what we have left are the arms, starting with the right arm. So bring your awareness to the upper part of the right arm. Relax all the muscles in that area. And then the elbow. And the lower arm. And then the wrist. Hand and fingers. And from there, shift your awareness to the upper part of the left arm. And then the elbow, the lower part of the arm, the wrist, hand and fingers. So we've gone through the whole body in a brief way, just trying our best to relax and let go of any tension in the body. So try your best to keep your body as relaxed as possible for the rest of the time that we're meditating. We're mainly going to focus on the breath flowing in and flowing out, using the breath as a kind of anchor to keep our mind, our awareness right here in this place and in this moment, the present moment, so the here and now. So much of the time, our mind is not in the present. It's wandering around to the past, to the future, to other places, people, all kinds of things. So when we meditate, we try to give our mind a break from that usual busy activity, which can be very tiring and also very emotionally upsetting sometimes. So keeping our mind on the breath in the here and now, the present moment, can really help the mind to calm down. It's a good thing for the mind, healing for the mind. So just do the best you can to keep your mind focused on the breath and be aware of each breath that's coming in and going out, one breath after another. But this isn't easy to do because our mind has the habit, the tendency of not staying on one object for more than a few seconds. So very quickly it'll start jumping to some other object, thinking about something, planning something, remembering something. So when that happens, try to be aware of it. Try not to react with feeling upset or impatient, disgusted with yourself. So just accept that's the nature of the mind. That's the way our mind is. And in a kind and gentle way, bring your mind back to the breath. Detach your mind from that other object, let it go, and come back to the breath. And those other thoughts, memories, and so forth are impermanent, transitory. They're like clouds that come and go in the sky, or waves that rise and fall on the ocean. They're impermanent. They come and go. So if we just notice the thoughts, the memories, the feelings, you can label them if you want. You can say thinking or feeling happy or feeling sad or whatever. Give it a name. But then let it go and come back to the breath. If it's really hard to stay on the breath, one thing that can help is counting. And one way of counting is to count each breath as one. So you can say to yourself, breathing in, breathing out one, breathing in, breathing out two, and so on. And keep counting up to 10 or up to 20. You can choose. If you're not so experienced with meditation, it might be best to just count up to 5 and then go back to 1. So it's optional. You don't have to count, but it can help to keep our mind more focused, more present, more attentive to the breath. Sometimes when we meditate, our mind goes on a long journey away from the present moment, away from the breath. It can even create a whole fantasy or a story. And then suddenly we realize that we're not supposed to be doing that. We're supposed to be watching the breath. And we come back. So that's normal. And it doesn't help to get upset with yourself or beat yourself up for doing that. We don't have control over our mind. Our mind just does its own thing. So just be glad that you noticed your mind has wandered away from the present, from the breath, and bring it back to the breath with an attitude of patience and kindness towards yourself and towards your mind and your thoughts. And just let go of those other thoughts. Let them float out of your mind like clouds disappearing from the sky. So there's just a few minutes left of the meditation. Try to do the best you can during these last few minutes to stay in the present, stay on the breath, come back to the breath when the mind wanders away. Okay, so you can now relax, open your eyes, and if you need to change your position, you can do so. So, practicing meditation naturally makes us more aware of things, such as things around us, sounds and smells and things going on. It also makes us more aware of ourselves, our body, things happening in our body, and also in our mind, different kinds of thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, and so on. And the real purpose of practicing meditation in Buddhism is to become more aware of our mind and work on our mind, because our mind itself, the basic nature of the mind, is like neutral. It's not really good or bad. It's a bit like air, like space. And it allows all kinds of different traffic, different activities, different kinds of thoughts and memories and emotions, and all kinds of things can happen in this space of our mind. And among these different thoughts and emotions, there are some which in the traditional Buddhist teachings, they're called klesha, which is sometimes translated as delusions. These are aspects of the mind that cause the mind to be disturbed, troubled, in turmoil, unhappy, unpeaceful. Now, so they kind of disturb the peace of the mind. Whereas other mental states that can arise in the mind are more what we call positive, because they make the mind peaceful and happy and in a good state. And also in our relationships with others, we have more positive thoughts and feelings and energy, so we're more likely to do things that are helpful to others rather than harmful. So one of the main points in Buddhism is looking at our mind and trying to recognize, differentiate which aspects of the mind are helpful and positive and which ones are unhelpful and negative, and then work on the mind to have more of the positive and less of the negative. And so that's actually a big part of Buddhism, is being able to recognize the disturbing negative aspects of the mind and then find methods to work on them. So we started talking about this a couple of weeks ago. I spoke about anger. We looked at anger, hatred, irritation, dislike, that whole family of emotions, which are really painful. And tonight we're going to look at fear, and what we can do with fear. It's actually quite interesting in my studies of Tibetan Buddhism. Even though there's a lot of explanation about different what are called mental factors. These are aspects of our mind that come and go in our mind, and some are positive and some are negative and some are neutral. And but there's no mention of fear. Fear is not mentioned, as even though they have a list of 51, I think 51 mental factors, none of them mention fear. Although that doesn't mean, Buddhism doesn't recognize fear, because it is mentioned in other contexts. So it's definitely recognized, but there isn't much talk about whether fear is positive or negative, and what to do about it, how to deal with it. So this question comes up a lot when I'm teaching in the West or teaching Westerners. People ask about fear because people have a lot of fear. And it's troubling, it's disturbing. So I've just sort of put together some things based on what I do know about Buddhism, plus my own experiences and talking with other people and so on. So that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. And as always with the Buddhist teachings, we are encouraged to not just blindly believe and accept things dogmatically. Buddhism is not dogmatic, but instead to question, to investigate, to think for ourselves and decide for ourselves if we think something is true or not. So what I'm saying tonight, like I say, this is a combination of my own thoughts and experiences plus things I've learned from Buddhism. So you're not at all obliged to believe anything that I say. You can reject it or question it or investigate it or whatever. But let's see. So I think that fear itself isn't necessarily a bad thing because in our life, in our world, there are dangers. There are sources of potential harm that we need to be aware of. And fear is just a natural response when we do encounter something harmful or what we think may be harmful. It may not always be, but so it's just a natural response. And it has the function of protecting us. So, for example, if we see a snake, not all snakes are dangerous, but some are. So it's important to be able to know, that that particular type of snake is dangerous. If we get close, if we get bit by it, we could die. Some snakes are really, maybe not in Denmark, I don't know. You have snakes in Denmark? But some places in the world, there are snakes, and some of those snakes are really deadly, deadly. So we need to know about that. And if we encounter one of those snakes when we're walking in the woods, to be able to recognize, that's a potential source of harm and maybe even death. So fear then will stop us from getting too close and protect us from those kinds of situations. And the same when we're little kids, and we are told by our parents that when we go out into the street, we should first look, see if there's any traffic, any cars or trucks or motorcycles or bicycles coming. So as a little kid, you don't know that. You just run, the ball's gone into the street, you just run after it. You don't think about looking. So we have to be told to look before running into the street. Otherwise, we could get hit by a car and possibly killed. So there are potential sources of harm and suffering and even death that we need to be aware of and have a healthy sort of fear, healthy sense of fear. So I think we can distinguish healthy fear and unhealthy fear. So healthy fear would be when there is thing that we need to protect ourselves from, something that could harm us. So we have to take precautions. So that's healthy fear. Whereas there's also unhealthy fear. So unhealthy fear there could be different possibilities. One is if we're afraid when there's really no reason to be afraid. Sometimes people, like our minds, they can just create ideas, thoughts, fantasies about things which aren't really true, aren't really there. Like you hear a noise. If you're home alone at night, you hear some noise, and then your mind starts, maybe it's a robber. Maybe someone's going to break in and, kill me, rob me, rape me, whatever. Yeah. So our mind can just spin off into fantasies, and we find ourselves just feeling completely terrified. Now, there may be no reason at all to feel that way. It could be a mouse or cat or just the neighbor. And so I'm sure we've all had that kind of experience, right? Where our mind just fantasizes and creates things, and we get ourselves worked up with fear when there's really no reason to be afraid. So that would be unhealthy fear. Or another example of unhealthy fear would be even if there is some potential source of harm or danger, but we get kind of paralyzed with fear and unable to think clearly about what to do, right? Well, what do I do here? How do I deal with this, right? So sometimes you just are paralyzed with fear and can't think and can't act and can't do anything, run, or whatever you need to do. So that would also be unhealthy fear. What do you think? Does that make sense? So this is one thing. When working with fear, if we do find ourselves feeling afraid, is to ask ourselves, is there really something to be afraid of? Is there really a good reason to be afraid? Or is this just the mind creating fantasies, making things up, exaggerating? Um, does that make sense? And then, even if there is some reason to be afraid, if it's the healthy type of fear, and there really is something there that could be harmful, could potentially harm us or harm our loved ones or whatever, um, then instead of just being kind of frozen, paralyzed, immobilized, unable to act, unable to do anything, it's better to learn to bring kind of intelligence, wisdom, common sense in and check, so is there anything I can do? Anything that I can do about this situation? Instead of just being in a state of panic, just to look, is there something that I can do about this situation? Is there somebody I can call? If I can't defend myself, take care of myself in this situation, is there someone I can call, someone I can ask for help? That's one thing we could do, ask for help from somebody else. Or just find practical things we can do. If there's a snake, for example, you can run away from it. As a Buddhist, we try to avoid killing. Yeah. So that for a Buddhist, that wouldn't be an option. That's what some people would do. But if you're Buddhist, you, you don't want to do that. But you can run away from it, or you can find some way of removing the snake from you, catch it. I was living a couple of years ago, I was living in a place in California, a retreat center. In California, we have rattlesnakes. They are dangerous. They can kill you. So, so I didn't happen to see this rattlesnake, but the caretaker guy who was working there on the land, taking care of the land, taking care of the buildings, and so on, he said one day he was just walking through the yard and came across a rattlesnake, just lying there in the sun, curled up, and coiled up and lying there in the sun. And so he took a bucket, snuck up with a bucket and put the bucket on top of the rattlesnake, and then slid something underneath the bucket so that the rattlesnake got into the bucket, and then he took it off somewhere and far away from the houses. Yeah. So this is something you can do. There are things you can do other than killing. I've done this with scorpions in Dharamsala, where I stay. Sometimes there are scorpions that get into your house, sometimes into your bed, sometimes, and I don't think they can kill you, but I guess they can hurt you and maybe make you sick. And they're just scary. I mean, just when I see a scorpion, I'm really just the look of them is terrifying. So I don't really like having them in my room. So this is what I do with scorpions. I put a cup or a jar or something on top of it and then slide something underneath, get it inside, and then take it out. And so there are alternatives to killing. And spiders as well. So any kind of creature that you don't want, around you, you can remove it, take it away. Or ask somebody else. If you're really scared, you can't do it yourself. Ask someone else to do it for you. So anyway, that's the yeah. termites. Those are really hard because they're inside the wood usually, and it's very hard to get. Yeah, yeah. I was telling a story, I think, recently about I was living in a Buddhist center in France, and it was in an old chateau built in the 1800s or whatever, and a very beautiful place, but very old. And at one point, we discovered there was I don't think it was termites; it was something else, some other kind of insect that was living inside of the beams. And apparently, there's no way to get rid of them except to kill them. And if you don't do that, then they'll just eat away all the wood and make it totally rotten, and then the whole building will just collapse. So we had a lama, a Tibetan lama, as the resident teacher. So he was consulted. What do we do? We don't want to kill, but there's not much choice. So anyway, they did explore all possibilities and found there was no other possibility. So he said, well, if we don't kill them, then this building is just going to collapse. It's going to be destroyed. And that's not good for us. And it's not good for what we're doing here, because what we're doing here, we're not just living here to enjoy ourselves, but we have a Buddhist center here. We have courses. We're teaching people meditation and Buddhism and helping them to make their lives better and so on. So we're doing really good work here. And to let all of that go just so some insects can eat the building doesn't make any sense. So he said, we really have no choice but to call the exterminators. But working with karma, when you do have to create, it is bad karma. Killing is bad karma. But there are different factors you can work with to make the karma less bad, less heavy. For example, your motivation, your intention. If you do something out of anger, hatred, I hate those creatures, and I really want to kill them. So if that's your intention, that makes it heavier, worse karma, than if you're doing it with an absence of that kind of attitude, and instead you really feel compassion. You don't want to hurt them. You want them to be happy, but you just have no choice. So making your intention positive rather than negative makes the karma lighter. And then we did prayers, dedicated the prayers that these creatures would go to a better situation in their next life, and talk to them. We really don't want to hurt you, but we have no choice here, and so on. So anyway, these are some things that we did to, make it less negative, less bad. So if you're in a situation like that where there really is no choice, no other way of dealing other than to kill, then yeah, this is the world that we live in. It's very difficult sometimes. So we try to avoid killing, but sometimes there are situations like that. Somebody else was bringing up about head lice. Children get lice in their hair, and and she said even if you shave the head, you cut off all the hair, the lice will go to body hairs. I didn't know that. So again, I guess there's no way of eliminating them. Another one is stomach worms. Stomach worms. Yeah. So again, there's no way other than taking some kind of medicine that will kill them. So the idea is we try to avoid killing as much as we can. And if we can't avoid it, then at least we try to do it in a compassionate way rather than a hateful, cruel way. And try to do it as little as possible rather than, again and again. Okay, so one method then for dealing with fear, if you find yourself feeling afraid, I'll just explain this meditation, and then we can do it after the break. So if you feel fear or anxiety, just sit down and just look at it and ask yourself some questions. One question is, what exactly is it that I'm afraid of? Sometimes we may just feel this vague sense of fear, but we don't know why. Yeah. So to just try to identify, why am I afraid? What am I afraid of? Yeah. So that's often very helpful. And then once you do identify why or what it is you're afraid of, then ask yourself, is this reasonable? Is it reasonable for me to have this fear? Is there really a danger here? Because again, sometimes your mind, your mind is just fantasizing, exaggerating, inventing things which might happen. Maybe that will happen, but maybe there's very little chance that it would happen. you know, given the situation. Like to be afraid of snakes in Denmark. If you go outside your house and walk down the street, a snake is going to bite you. I mean, that's not a very reasonable fear because, poisonous snakes just don't exist here unless they escaped from the zoo. But this far, there's a kind of snake? Okay. Huh? Oh, yeah. And is it living in certain places, like in the jungle? In jungle, you don't have jungle. Forests or gardens? Forests. It's not going to be downstairs outside in the street. Okay. So that's just an example, that walking down the street in Copenhagen and being afraid that a snake is going to bite you, that's a pretty unrealistic fear. There's very little chance that would happen. And another example of this, because there are people who are afraid of airplanes, flying in airplanes. And it's like they really believe if they get in an airplane and an airplane takes off, it's going to crash and they're going to die. And I saw some statistics once of the number of planes that take off and land safely without any, crash, and those that crash. And it's very, 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 very little. It's very unlikely that a plane is going to crash. Most planes do not crash. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's very, very, very small. On the other hand, cars are much more dangerous. The number of cars that crash, the number of people that get killed or injured in car crashes is much, much, much higher. But I've never heard of anybody afraid of getting into a car and driving in a car. Maybe there are people, but it's very unusual for somebody to be afraid of driving in a car. But the reality is you're much more likely to get injured in a car than in a plane, right? And yet some people anyway, are terrified of flying. Now, somebody mentioned one reason might be because if you are in a car crash, you might think you can jump out before, it crashes. Whereas you in a plane, yeah, you can't really jump out of the plane. Or you can, but you probably wouldn't survive. So you feel more vulnerable in a plane, right, than in a car. Maybe that's one reason. But anyway, that to me that seems like an unrealistic fear. Uh, um, it's not a really good basis for that kind of fear. So anyway, this is the point. The point here is to check: is the fear that I have realistic or not? Is what I'm afraid of, is it definitely going to happen, or maybe it's going to happen, or it's very unlikely that it will happen? So just kind of investigate that. And you might discover, yeah, it might happen. What I'm afraid of might happen. There's a possibility, a chance that it might happen. Then you look at, well, is there anything I can do to prevent it from happening? Are there things I can do? if you're afraid of a thief breaking into your house, you make sure the doors and the windows are locked and closed. Okay, so there are precautions that we can at least try to take to prevent the thing that we're afraid of from happening. Right? So this is kind of using our intelligence, our common sense to protect ourselves. And another thing here would be to look at help. Are there sources of help? If we feel we may not be able to take care of this ourselves or protect ourselves on our own, are there others we can turn to for help? Sources of help. So that might be another option. And another thing is to check, even if this thing does happen to me, will it really be that bad? Because this is another thing that our mind does. Our mind sort of gets carried away thinking, oh, it's going to be terrible if that happens to me. It will be the worst thing in the world. It will be unbearable. I won't be able to stand it. It will be, we kind of exaggerate that. So that can be helpful to look at. Will it really be that bad? Will it be so terrible? And one thing I find helpful is to think about other people who've been through that experience. Yeah, there are people who've been through that experience and came out of it, survived. They were okay. I mean, maybe this is just one possibility. Yeah. For example, cancer. If you're afraid of getting cancer, oh, that would be so terrible. Oh, I couldn't bear it. Well, if you investigate, you can find, there's lots of people who get cancer. Some of them have a really hard time, but some of them don't. Yeah, it's not, we may be exaggerating how bad it is. We may be, making it into something much worse than it really is. And it can be helpful to talk to people or to look at stories, read books, investigate, find information. And also sometimes there's solutions. Even if you do have to go through some bad experience like cancer, there are things you can do to make it less bad. And I'm not just talking about medication, but meditation. So it's been found that meditation practice and other kinds of practices, spiritual practices or loving kindness, there's lots of different things you can do with your mind. Even if you can't deal with the physical situation, that's there. But there are things you can do on the mental level with your mind, your attitudes, that can make it more manageable, more bearable than just letting your mind freak out and be upset. Right? So these are just things we can do to look at our fear rather than just letting our mind be totally taken over by, overwhelmed by, carried away by our fears. But using our intelligence, our wisdom to investigate these different things, this can be very helpful. So we'll do a meditation on this afterwards. Let's have a break now for 10 minutes. And if you're thirsty, upstairs there's some tea, coffee, and some snacks if you're hungry. So, um, I'm not a psychologist, but I have heard that some cases of fear, for example, PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, so um, people suffering from that kind of fear, um, it may not be so helpful to do meditation. I don't have this experience myself, but this is just what I've heard that, they try to do meditation, the fear can just come up really powerfully and overwhelm them, and they become more afraid rather than less afraid. So my understanding is if, the fear is that kind, if it's to that degree, that extent, um, then I I would suggest checking with the therapist as to whether or not meditation would be helpful for you.
I actually saw a documentary.
Sorry? Yeah.
I saw a documentary. People with the PSD that meditated, and they tried everything else, medicine and everything, and it came down by 80%. It had this
Hmm.
that documentary.
But were they meditating on their own or under the guidance of?
On they both.
So they had somebody guiding them and
Yeah,
taking.
in the
Yeah.
week, and then they were meditating like 1 hour each day.
Yeah, I'm not saying one shouldn't meditate, but if you just do it on your own, if you're just meditating by yourself, you may not be able to handle it. So I think it would be best to do it under the care of a therapist or a teacher, someone there who's kind of guiding you and holding your hand and helping you and make, so you don't overdo it. And there's actually a wonderful book I read by, it was written by a man who was a soldier during the Vietnam War back in the 60s, 70s. He was only 18 years old at that time, very, very young. And he had some really horrific experiences, horrible experiences. And when he came back home to America after that, he was a real mess. For 20 years or so, he was just, couldn't sleep at night. He was doing a lot of drugs and alcohol and was trying to avoid the memories and the emotions and everything. And suffered a lot, sometimes wanted to commit suicide and was sometimes violent. Finally, he met Thich Nhat Hanh and started learning meditation and practicing meditation, and that helped tremendously. But it was still hard, and but definitely it was very, very, very helpful for him to deal with that kind of stress, which is must be the worst. One of the worst things that anybody could go through. Combat stress, having people die and seeing people die, and yourself, constantly in danger of being killed. So really heavy stress and trauma. So anyway, I'm not saying, meditate. You shouldn't meditate. It can be very, very, very helpful, but just be careful about doing it on your own, and best to do it, with a teacher, with a therapist, someone who has knowledge and skill and experience and can help you to guide you into using meditation. Okay, so let's do a meditation on what I was talking about earlier, a way of kind of facing the fear and using wisdom to deal with it. So I'm going to ask you to bring to mind an experience of fear that you have either in the present or in the past. And if you have some really huge fear, then maybe it's better not to think of that right now, but think of some smaller fear. It's best to start with something small, and later you can build up and eventually be able to deal with really huge fears. Start with just a relatively small fear for now. So start by sitting comfortably and trying to keep your back straight, but at the same time be relaxed as much as possible. And just for a few moments, watch your breath. Let your breath flow in and out in a natural rhythm. And just let your mind be aware of the breathing. Rest on the breathing, coming in, going out. And in that way, let your mind settle down and be here and now in the present. And put aside thoughts that are not related to what we're doing here, thoughts of future plans and so on. Just try to stay focused as much as you can on the meditation that we're doing. And now bring to mind something that you're afraid of or worried about, anxious about. Again, not your biggest, most overwhelming fear, but something smaller, milder. So it could be something coming up for you in the future that you're kind of worried about, nervous about. Whether you do well or you won't do well, whether you will succeed or fail, or maybe you have to go to the dentist and you're afraid it might be painful. Just some kind of fear that's there in your mind. So once you have thought of the fear, then explore it more carefully to try to understand exactly why it is you have this fear, what it is you're afraid of. Does your mind sort of have fantasies about terrible things that you might have to go through and how unbearable they will be? So just clearly identify what it is you're afraid of. Why are you afraid? And then once you have a clear idea of what it is you're afraid of, ask yourself how definite it is that those things will actually happen. Is it 100% definite, or is it just a possibility? Maybe a good possibility, or maybe a little possibility. So just try to determine realistically if the thing you're afraid of will actually happen. And then, if you can see that there is a chance, there is a possibility that what you're afraid of will happen, then look to see if there are things you can do to prevent it, to protect yourself from that happening. Or another way of looking at this is, if it does happen, are there things you can do to handle it better, to manage it better, so it's not so terrible, so horrible, so unbearable? And this, of course, can include seeking help from others. So there may be people you can turn to for help, ask for help if the situation becomes very difficult. And this may also include spiritual practices like meditation, prayer, or practices for working with your mind, changing your mind, your attitudes, your way of looking at things. So these can be useful solutions when we have to face difficulties. Another thing that could be helpful is to contemplate that there are most probably other people who have been in such a situation, been through such a situation, and maybe they did okay. They were able to manage, they were able to handle it. And so you could draw strength and comfort from that and think, well, other people have done it. I can do it too. Now check to see if there has been any change to the feeling of fear or anxiety that you had at the beginning of the meditation. Is it still as strong as before, or has it changed? Has it lessened or increased? And if it is still there, another thing that can be helpful in dealing with fear or dealing with any disturbing emotion is to just accept it. That means don't try to push it away, don't try to fight with it, get rid of it, feel bad about it. Just open up your mind, open up your heart, and in a very caring, compassionate, friendly, gentle way, just allow that feeling to be there. Just accept it and just observe it in a kind, compassionate way. So, that last part I mentioned of just accepting it um, can be hard to do because it's not what we usually do. Usually, when we have some unpleasant emotion, unwanted emotion, our way of dealing with it is to feel, I don't want this, I don't like this, I want it to go away, I want to get rid of it. So we have this kind of aversion and rejection of it, or fear. We can also be afraid of it. So there it's like fear of fear, being afraid of fear. And it's natural to feel that way, to feel fear or aversion. But that kind of reaction doesn't help, and it just makes it worse. Yeah, just then it becomes like inner tension, inner conflict, inner tightness, fighting within ourselves. And that just really makes it worse, makes the whole thing worse. Whereas if you can turn that attitude around and instead of being afraid of it and wanting to get rid of it, wanting to reject it, if you can just say, okay, it's there, I accept it. And do that with an attitude of kindness, compassion, acceptance. It's not easy to do. You may have to work on it for a while before you're able to do that. But if you can do that, it's kind of amazing what happens. That feeling. I mean, this is my experience, and I know other people experience it as well. It just goes. It almost like dissolves, disappears in space. It's not. It's just not there anymore. And whereas if you're resisting it and fighting it and afraid of it, it almost digs its heels in and gets stronger and worse. So it's quite interesting. So even if you weren't able to do it now during this meditation, try it again on your own and keep trying it. until you're able to do that, because that can be a very helpful thing, not just for fear, but anger, unhappiness, any unpleasant, disturbing emotion that we might have. This is a really good solution, really good method for dealing with it. And one thing the Dalai Lama says for dealing with fear, especially, he spoke about this in response to a question that was asked, like when he often gives talks, and sometimes there's tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people there listening to his talk, and that's a pretty scary situation for most people, having to talk in front of others, even if it's just a small group of people. Some people are just terrified of that. So he was asked, if he feels afraid of having to talk in front of so many people. And he said, yes, sometimes I do. And he says what he does is he focuses on the people that he's going to talk to and generates compassion, altruism, and thinks, I want to do something good for them. I want to make them happy. I want to benefit them. So he focuses on the people and generates this positive attitude. And that dispels the fear, because he says the fear is really about me. That kind of fear is about, will they like me? Will I do a good job? Or will I make a fool of myself? Look stupid? And so on. So it's a lot about I. And so turning the attention away from me and to them gives you confidence. He said that that sense of care and compassion and altruism gives you courage, gives you confidence. That's his experience anyway, and I find it as well. And it's something you could use, even if you don't have to give a talk in front of a bunch of people, but just like a job interview or meeting a new person or whatever, having to deal with another person or another group of people. And if you're feeling nervous about that, then this can be really helpful to change your mind and don't worry so much about you, about me, but think about them and generate the wish that this encounter will be beneficial for them, that they will be happy, even to just, do the there's these verses that we say to generate loving kindness. May you be happy, may you be free of suffering. So to just repeat those words to yourself, thinking about the people that you're going to be meeting. May they be happy. May I make them happy. Something like that. You can just make up your own words. But anyway, the point is generate good thoughts, positive thoughts and feelings towards them. And that can be really, really helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was also thinking another thing that can help is like you're giving a talk, spotting the people who look friendly and kind, other than people who look critical because they will give rise to more fear to the people like that.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that could help.
That's a good idea. Also, I just remembered something because I have this kind of fear, believe it or not. When I was young, I was incredibly shy and I couldn't talk even in front of one other person. So I've done this for many years now, and it's a lot easier now. But one thing somebody told me once is, don't look in people's eyes, look between their eyes. And I found that really helpful because looking in people's eyes can be kind of shaky, it shakes up your confidence. But if you look between their eyes, it looks to them that like you're looking at them, but you're not actually. You don't get that eye contact, which might, shake you up. So anyway, that was something that was helpful for me. And at one point in time, I don't need to worry about that so much anymore. But it's similar with you, like if somebody's has a really not very friendly looking face, yeah, just don't look at them or look between their eyes, look at their nose instead of their eyes.
It's also good actually someone telling something like quite sad makes you loosely, or just a bit like person, so you don't feel that sad.
So intense, less
So it's
intense.
avoiding the
Mm,
hot feeling.
mm. Any other questions or comments or helpful hints, tips on how to deal with fear? I mean, there's another thing too that's for some people this may not work, but for some it could, and that is to have an object of refuge. So, I mean, for Christians, they would take refuge. They would pray to God or Jesus or Mary or one of the saints. For a Muslim, it would be Allah. But for Buddhists, we also have the Buddhas. There's many different Buddhas. So people sometimes feel more connected with one Buddha or another. And that can be very helpful, especially if we find ourselves in a really scary situation. And it's natural. It's just natural that we feel this like calling out for help. I need help here. There's no human being around that can come to our rescue. Um, Praying to one of the Buddhists could be helpful. Again, I'm not, it's not something that everybody could relate to, but for those who can, this can be a source of help because then you don't feel so alone. I think that's the thing, you don't feel I'm all alone having to face this frightening, this terrible situation. Somebody's there to help me. And so that can bring, again, like the Dalai Lama says, it gives you courage, it gives you confidence, you feel stronger. So, so that's always something you could do as well. And this statue on the right of the altar is a statue of Tara, who's a female Buddha. And it's said in the teachings that she's someone we can pray to. And there's a whole teaching about how she saves from fears. And there's two ways of explaining these fears. One is outer fears, things like floods and fires and wild animals and so on. But each of those outer fears has an inner, uh, corresponds with some inner fear, one of the delusions, like, anger or, greed or doubt or these kind of disturbing emotions that it can come up in our mind and then our mind gets totally caught up in them. And so that's the real benefit of Tara or any of the Buddhas, is to help us deal with um, these inner sources of fear, inner sources of suffering, and so on, how to manage those. So that's a nice teaching if you're interested. In fact, there's a whole book. I'm trying to remember if I saw it on the bookshelf or not. A book by Thupten Chodron. I think it's called How to Free Your Mind. And it's all about Tara, practice of Tara and the different fears that Tara can help with. I don't know if it's here. I was at a friend's house today and maybe I saw it on her bookshelf. I just have this image in my mind of seeing it on a bookshelf. um, but anyway. So how about if, just to finish for a few minutes, get together with one other person or two other people and just share something you learned from being here tonight that you would like to carry home with you, that you found helpful and want to keep in mind and not forget. So just take turns sharing that with each other for a few minutes. be interested in if you're still concerned about dealing with fear. It's called The Places That Scare You. Pema Chudran. I know I don't remember if I've actually read it myself, but it has an interesting title.
Probably not only about the places.
Huh?
It's probably not only about the places that scare us.
No, I mean it's
It's just, yeah, in
yeah,
yourself.
in yourself, wherever, anything. Yeah. So it's facing the whole basically the idea is facing fear, dealing with fear rather than running away. And I was just thinking too that one thing that's helpful to look at is, does it help to be worried? You know, this is another, it's not exactly the same as fear, but this tendency of the mind to worry, maybe this will happen, maybe that will happen. And I mean, the mind just does that on its own, but we don't have to let our mind do that. You know, we can say, stop it. This isn't any good. I did this myself on the day after the American election. Um, I was really upset, really, really, really unhappy. And at one point I said, what's going on in here? And I realized my mind was just worrying, oh, it's going to be terrible. Oh, all these awful things are going to happen. And I said, what good does it do to sit here now and worry about what might happen in the future? I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe it won't be so bad. And anyway, worrying, it's like the mind is just creating these ideas, these fantasies about terrible things that will happen, but maybe they won't happen. So it's just useless. It's like a useless mental activity. So I just said, stop it. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to focus on what I can do, live my life in the way that I think is useful and try to help other people as much as I can. But that kind of worry is really useless. So, if that makes sense to you, then if you find yourself worrying, good idea to unlearn that habit. And again, look at, well, what can I do? Are there useful things I can do, practical things I can do, beneficial things I can do? Put your energy into those things rather than into worrying. Okay, so we'll stop here for tonight. And we usually close by making a dedication of the positive energy we've created. When we do something positive, like doing meditation or looking at how we can make our mind more positive. So, this is good work, and we create positive energy, and then we can share that positive energy with others, sharing it with, if you're comfortable with the idea, all living beings. May all living beings benefit from what we have done here tonight. Might bring them more peace and happiness and less fear and anxiety and pain and suffering and so on. And may it help all of us get closer to enlightenment. Okay, so just to mention, next week I won't be teaching. We'll have a class, but it will be given by a visiting teacher, Rob Priest, who's an English man coming from England. He's a Jungian psychologist as well as a long time Buddhist student and practitioner and teacher. And I think what he's talking about is called the nature of suffering, something like that. Is that right? Psychological understanding of suffering, something like that. So, so I think everyone is welcome to come to that talk, and then I will continue the following Thursday. I guess that will be the last Thursday of May, and I will also continue in June. We haven't yet made the calendar for June, but I will be teaching up until the end of June. So we will still have classes in June. And then in July, we usually stop for July. A lot of people go away anyway, so. Huh? You can stay, yes. I'm going away. Mm. Okay, so good night. Thank you.